My name is Nancy Reynolds, 32 years old, and a senior financial analyst at Meridian Solutions. For 6 years, I poured my heart into this company, consistently earning excellent performance reviews. When I saved the company millions on the Watson project, my boss promised me a substantial raise. I was finally going to buy that little house I had been eyeing. Walking into the CFO Richard's office that Friday should have been a formality, instead he barely looked up from his screen. "Your raise. We optimized that liability." He laughed. My stomach dropped. I knew something was terribly wrong. If you are watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you are tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever had a boss try to cheat you out of something you earned. Trust me, you will want to see how this ends. I grew up in a middle-class household in Ohio, the daughter of a nurse and a high school teacher. From an early age, my parents instilled in me the importance of education and hard work. I was the first person in my family to attend college, and I did not take that opportunity lightly. I worked part-time jobs throughout my undergraduate years, then pushed myself even harder to earn my MBA from State University. By the time I graduated with my master's degree, I had accumulated $80,000 in student loan debt. Not ideal, but I believed it was an investment in my future. Like many fresh graduates, I was full of ambition and ready to conquer the corporate world. The reality, however, was humbling. The job market was competitive, and despite my academic achievements, I started at the bottom like everyone else. After several interviews and a few disappointing rejections, I landed an entry-level position at Meridian Solutions, a mid-sized financial consulting firm with about 500 employees nationwide. The starting salary was modest, but the company had a good reputation and promised growth opportunities based on performance. Perfect, I thought. I would work hard and climb the ladder through merit. When I first joined Meridian, the company culture seemed to live up to its brochure. The CEO, Catherine Williams, often spoke about creating an environment where talent was recognized and rewarded regardless of background or connections. Town hall meetings highlighted employee achievements, and the annual performance reviews were detailed and constructive. For someone eager to prove herself, this environment felt ideal. My role as a junior financial analyst involved supporting senior team members on client projects, running financial models, preparing presentations, and occasionally joining client meetings to take notes. Basic stuff, but I approached each task with thoroughness and attention to detail that quickly caught the attention of my direct supervisor, Marcus Thompson. Marcus was a fair and supportive manager who recognized hard work. By the end of my first year, he had given me more responsibility than other junior analysts, allowing me to lead portions of client presentations and develop financial strategies for smaller accounts. During those first few years, I consistently exceeded expectations. In my second year, I identified a calculation error in a standard template the company had been using for years, potentially saving clients from significant tax penalties. In year 3, I developed a new financial model for retail clients that improved forecast accuracy by 23%. These achievements earned me regular praise, solid performance reviews, and annual raises of 4 to 5%. The pattern of work hard, receive recognition, and get rewarded reinforced my trust in the company. By my 4th year, I had been promoted to financial analyst and then to senior financial analyst, managing my own small team and handling significant client relationships. While my professional life was thriving, my personal finances remained challenging. The burden of student loans meant I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment rather than buying a home like many of my colleagues. I was also helping support my mother, who had developed chronic health issues after my father passed away during my senior year of college. Her medication alone cost nearly $800 monthly after insurance. Despite these challenges, I was gradually getting ahead. I had my eye on a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood about 20 minutes from the office. Nothing fancy, just 900 square feet with a small yard and a front porch, perfect for morning coffee. At $280,000, it was at the upper limit of what I could afford. But with each promotion and raise, it came closer to reality. Then came the Watson project, a major opportunity that would change everything. Meridian had landed a contract with Watson Industries, a manufacturing giant looking to streamline their financial operations across 50 locations nationwide. The project was challenging and high-profile with numerous stakeholders and complex requirements. Marcus assigned me as the lead analyst, a significant vote of confidence. For 6 months, I worked 60 to 70-hour weeks diving deep into Watson's financial structures, identifying inefficiencies and developing custom solutions. I skipped family gatherings, postponed vacations, and even worked through a nasty bout of flu to keep the project on track. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. My innovative approach to consolidating their accounting systems saved Watson Industries an estimated $11 million annually while improving accuracy and compliance. The client was thrilled, and Meridian received glowing testimonials that helped secure 3 additional major contracts. 2 days after the successful project conclusion, Marcus called me into his office. "Nancy, the executive team is extremely impressed with your work on the Watson account," he said, leaning forward with a smile. "I have been advocating for a substantial recognition of your contribution." "Thank you, Marcus," I replied, trying to contain my excitement. "I really appreciate your support." "They have approved a 15% raise," he continued. "It is the largest performance-based increase I have seen in my 8 years here." I nearly fell out of my chair. 15% would add roughly $12,000 to my annual salary. That would make the mortgage on my dream house comfortably affordable and help with my mother's medical expenses. "That is incredible," I said, my voice wavering slightly. "When does it take effect?" "You will need to meet with Richard from finance to finalize the paperwork," Marcus explained. "But it should be reflected in your next pay cycle." Richard Anderson was the company's CFO, a recent hire from a larger firm who had been brought in to optimize financial operations, whatever that meant. I had only interacted with him briefly at company functions, but he had always seemed polished and professional, if somewhat distant. That evening, I called my mother with the good news, then met with my best friends Allison and Michael for an impromptu celebration dinner. We toasted to my success and the new house that was now within reach. I even called a real estate agent to schedule a second viewing of the property. The next day, I received an email from Richard's assistant scheduling our meeting for Friday afternoon. The message was brief and formal, typical of administrative communications. I spent the rest of the week wrapping up the Watson project documentation and allowing myself to daydream about paint colors for my future home. Little did I know that the meeting with Richard would be nothing like I expected, and would set in motion a chain of events that would test me in ways I never anticipated. Friday afternoon arrived, and I took extra care with my appearance. I wore my navy blue suit, the one I saved for important client meetings, and the pearl earrings my mother had given me for graduation. I wanted to look professional and confident when discussing my well-earned raise. The executive floor of Meridian Solutions had a different atmosphere than the rest of the building. The hushed corridors were lined with framed awards and photographs of executives shaking hands with important clients. Richard's office was at the end of the hallway with a glass door and his name etched in silver letters. His assistant, a perfectly groomed woman named Diana, nodded when I arrived. "He will be with you shortly," she said without smiling. After a 10-minute wait, she finally gestured toward the door. "You can go in now." Richard's office was spacious and meticulously organized. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, and his large mahogany desk was clear except for a sleek laptop and a single notepad. I noticed the office had been recently renovated with expensive modern art on the walls and designer furniture that had not been there during my last visit. Richard himself was typing on his laptop, not bothering to look up when I entered. He was in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and the trim physique of someone who made time for the gym despite a busy schedule. I noticed an expensive-looking watch on his wrist that gleamed under the recessed lighting. "Have a seat," he said, still focused on his screen. I sat in the chair across from his desk and waited, growing increasingly uncomfortable as the seconds ticked by. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably only a minute, he closed his laptop and looked at me with a practiced smile that did not reach his eyes. "Nancy Wright from the Watson Project." "Yes," I replied, slightly taken aback that he would need to confirm who I was given the purpose of our meeting. "I am here about the paperwork for my raise." "Your raise?" he asked, his tone suddenly amused. He leaned back in his chair and actually chuckled. "We optimized that liability." I stared at him, not comprehending. "I am sorry, what do you mean?" Richard sighed as if explaining something to a child. "The company is implementing some cost-cutting measures. All discretionary compensation adjustments are being deferred indefinitely." "But this is not discretionary." I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the sinking feeling in my stomach. This raise was approved based on the success of the Watson project. Marcus Thompson confirmed it last week. Richard waved his hand dismissively. Thompson overstepped. All compensation decisions require final financial approval, which I did not give. But I was told it was already approved by the executive team. I persisted. Preliminary discussions are not final approvals, he said, his tone hardening. Look, Nancy, you should be grateful to have a job in this economy. Many companies are laying people off. We are simply being fiscally responsible. As he spoke, I noticed the new watch on his wrist again, which looked like it cost more than my monthly salary. I also recalled the obvious recent renovation of his office, which seemed at odds with his claims about company-wide cost-cutting. Are all raises being deferred? I asked carefully. A flicker of something crossed his face. That is confidential financial information. Now, if there is nothing else, I have another meeting in 5 minutes. The dismissal was clear. I stood up, legs slightly unsteady. Thank you for your time, I managed to say, my professional training kicking in despite my inner turmoil. As I walked back through the office past curious colleagues who could probably read the devastation on my face, I felt a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. 6 months of sacrifices of exceptional work, all dismissed in a 3-minute meeting. Back at my desk, I tried to focus on my work, but my mind kept replaying the conversation, searching for something I could have said or done differently. Around 4:30, Alexandra from the marketing department stopped by my cubicle. We had become friendly during the Watson project when she handled the client communications. Hey Nancy, are you okay? You look upset, she said, genuine concern in her voice. I hesitated, not wanting to spread office gossip but needing to talk to someone. I just found out my raise for the Watson project has been canceled. Alexandra's eyes widened. That is strange. Lisa, in accounting, just got her raise approved yesterday. Richard said all raises were being deferred due to cost-cutting measures. I said, confusion adding to my distress. That is definitely not true, Alexandra replied, lowering her voice. Jacob and Thomas in my department both got their scheduled raises last week. And Lisa said the same thing about people in accounting. A cold feeling settled in my chest. Did anyone you know have their raise deferred? Alexandra thought for a moment. Now that you mention it, Rachel was complaining about the same thing yesterday. And I think Amanda from legal too. I thanked Alexandra for the information and spent the rest of the afternoon in a fog, mechanically completing tasks while my mind raced. By the time I drove home, a pattern was emerging that made me feel sick. The 3 names Alexandra had mentioned were all women, while the colleagues who received their raises were men. That night, sitting in my small apartment that suddenly felt even more confining, I called my mother. I had been so excited to tell her about my house hunting plans earlier in the week, and now I had to explain why those plans were on hold. I just do not understand, Mom, I said, fighting back tears. I did everything right. The project was a huge success. Everyone said so. I am so sorry, sweetheart, my mother replied. Her voice sounded tired, and I felt a pang of guilt, knowing her medication was due for a refill soon, something I had hoped to help more with after my raise. Maybe I should just accept it, I said. Keep my head down and hope for another opportunity. There was a pause on the line. Nancy, your father always said that hope is not a strategy. You earned that raise. If something does not feel right, you should trust your instincts. After we hung up, I spent a restless night alternating between self-doubt and indignation. Had I misunderstood something? Was I overreacting? Or was I being unfairly denied something I had rightfully earned? By morning, one thing was clear. I needed more information before deciding what to do next. This was not just about money anymore. It was about fairness and respect for my work and contributions. I was not going to simply walk away without understanding what had really happened. Saturday morning, I woke up with purpose. If I was going to understand what happened with my raise and potentially challenge the decision, I needed facts, not just feelings. My analytical training kicked in, and I began to approach the situation like I would a complex financial problem. First, I reviewed my employment contract and the employee handbook, searching for any language about performance-based compensation. The contract was vague about raises but did mention that performance incentives would be administered according to company policy, as outlined in Section 7 of the employee handbook. I found my copy of the handbook and turned to Section 7. Subsection D specifically stated, performance-based compensation increases once approved through the standard management channels and communicated to the employee represent a binding commitment subject only to continued satisfactory performance through the effective date. This seems significant. My raise had been approved and communicated to me by Marcus. According to this policy, it should be binding. I made detailed notes and bookmarked the relevant pages. Next, I needed to determine if there truly was a pattern of gender-based discrimination in how raises were being handled. On Monday morning, I arrived at work early and began discreetly gathering information. During coffee breaks and lunch, I carefully steered conversations toward company finances and recent changes. By Wednesday, I had spoken with 15 colleagues across different departments. A clear pattern emerged. Of the 9 men I spoke with, 7 had received their expected raises or bonuses in the past month. Of the 6 women, only 1 had received her expected compensation increase, and she worked directly for Catherine, the CEO. That afternoon, I scheduled a meeting with Patricia Nelson from Human Resources. Patricia had been with Meridian for over a decade and had always seemed approachable and fair. I wanted to discuss a concern about my compensation. I began once we were seated in her small office. Patricia's smile remained fixed, but something in her eyes changed. "What seems to be the issue, Nancy?" I explained the situation with my promised raise and Richard's subsequent denial. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes. "I see," she said when I finished. "Well, compensation decisions are complex, and the finance department has final authority on these matters. But according to Section 7D of the Employee Handbook, once a raise is approved and communicated, it represents a binding commitment," I countered. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Policy interpretations can vary. Richard was brought in specifically to optimize our financial operations. Is denying promised raises only to female employees part of that optimization?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Patricia's eyes widened slightly. "That is a serious allegation, Nancy. I would be very careful about making claims like that without substantial evidence." "I am not making allegations," I replied. "I am asking questions based on patterns I have observed." "Well, I can assure you that Meridian takes compliance with equal opportunity laws very seriously," she said, her tone becoming more formal. "I can look into your specific situation, but I should warn you that Richard is not someone you want to cross. He has the full confidence of the board." The warning was clear, though Patricia had tried to couch it in professional language. As I left her office, I felt more certain than ever that something improper was happening, but also more aware of the risks of pursuing the matter. That evening, I met with Jennifer Parker, a former Meridian employee, who had left the company about 6 months earlier. We had kept in touch casually, and I had always wondered about her somewhat abrupt departure. "I am not surprised," Jennifer said, after I explained my situation. "The same thing happened to me last year. I was promised a bonus for the Westfield account, and then Richard came on board, and suddenly it was recalculated to practically nothing." "Did you challenge it?" I asked. Jennifer stirred her coffee. "I tried. I went to HR. I went to my manager. Eventually, I started finding myself excluded from important meetings assigned to less desirable projects. Nothing you could definitively point to as retaliation, but the message was clear. So you left." "I had to. But before you make any decisions, check Section 7 of your contract carefully. There was language about guaranteed incentives that I did not notice until after I left. Might give you some leverage I did not have." That night, I called my friend Brandon Walker, an attorney specializing in employment law. While he could not formally represent me due to potential conflicts with his firm, he agreed to review my employment documents and offer general advice. "Based on what you have shown me, specifically Section 7D, you have a strong case," Brandon said after reviewing the materials. "The language is clear that once approved and communicated, the raise is binding. The fact that you have evidence suggesting gender-based discrimination in how these decisions are being applied strengthens your position considerably." "What would you recommend as next steps?" I asked. "Document everything," Brandon advised. "Every conversation, every email. See if you can get anything in writing about why your raise was denied. Then make a formal written complaint. citing the specific policy violation that establishes a paper trail and puts them on notice that you know your rights. Armed with this advice, I stayed late at the office on Thursday, waiting until most employees had left. Using my project management access, I was able to review certain financial records that I normally would not need for my role. What I found was illuminating. There was indeed a cost-cutting initiative underway, but it appeared to be selectively applied. The records showed that while raises had been deferred for several employees, the company had simultaneously approved budget increases for executive benefits and certain male-dominated departments. Most significantly, I discovered an internal memo from Richard to the board that directly contradicted what he had told me. The memo, dated just 2 weeks earlier, stated that all previously approved performance bonuses and raises for the Watson project team would be honored, with the exception of certain adjustments to maintain appropriate compensation. Hierarchy. My name was specifically mentioned as one of the adjustments. The next day, I scheduled another meeting with Marcus, my direct supervisor. I needed to understand his role in all of this. I thought it was a done deal, Nancy Marcus said, looking genuinely distressed. I took the proposal to the executive committee. They approved it. I communicated it to you. Then Richard came to me afterward and said he was overriding it. Did he say why I pressed? Marcus hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Off the record, he made a comment about not needing to pay you as much because, and I quote, she does not have a family to support and will accept less. When I pointed out that was inappropriate, he said it was just financial. Reality that women would work for less, so why pay more than the market requires? My blood boiled, but I kept my expression neutral. And you accepted that? I fought it, Nancy. I went to Catherine, but she was traveling in Asia for that merger. By the time she got back, Richard had already restructured the entire compensation package for the project and presented it to the board as a cost-saving measure. I thanked Marcus for his honesty and left his office with a clearer picture of what I was up against. Richard was not just a difficult executive, he was deliberately implementing discriminatory compensation practices while hiding behind corporate financial jargon. That weekend, I compiled all my evidence into a comprehensive document. I had the handbook policy, the pattern of discriminatory raise denials, the internal memo contradicting Richard's claims about company-wide deferrals, and Marcus's account of Richard's explicit gender-based reasoning. On Monday morning, I sent a formal email to Patricia in HR, with copies to Marcus and Catherine outlining my concerns and requesting that my approved raise be instated in accordance with Company Policy Section 7D. I was professional but firm, making it clear that I had documentation supporting my claim. The evidence was mounting, my determination was growing, and I was prepared for whatever came next. This was no longer just about my raise, it was about standing up against a systemic problem that affected many of my colleagues. The battle lines were drawn, and I was ready. 3 days passed with no response to my email. On Thursday morning, I finally received a brief reply from Patricia. Your concerns have been noted and are under review. We appreciate your patience as we examine the circumstances. The corporate non-answer was frustrating but not surprising. Later that day, I received another email. This one from Richard himself. Nancy, it has come to my attention that you are questioning strategic financial decisions. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding about your role and the scope of your authority. I would be happy to clarify these boundaries in person at your convenience. The thinly veiled threat was clear: stay in your lane or face consequences. Rather than responding directly to Richard, I forwarded his email to Patricia with a simple note. Please add this to my ongoing complaint file. The next week brought subtle but noticeable changes. I was excluded from a client meeting I would normally have attended. A report I submitted was returned with unprecedented nitpicking about formatting issues that had never been problems before. Colleagues who had been friendly became more distant, apparently aware that I was now marked as a troublemaker. Marcus tried to be supportive but was clearly uncomfortable, caught between his role as my supervisor and his position in the management hierarchy. During our weekly check-in, he seemed distracted and nervous. Nancy, how are things going with the Fleming account? He asked, not quite meeting my eyes. The preliminary analysis is complete, I replied. I can have the full recommendation ready by Friday. Good. He nodded. And, about the other matter. Have you considered that pursuing this might create complications for your career trajectory here? I studied him carefully. Are you suggesting I should drop my complaint? Not officially, no, Marcus said quickly. I just want to make sure you understand the potential implications. I appreciate your concern, I said evenly. But this is about principle. If I back down now, what message does that send about how employees can be treated? Marcus sighed. For what it is worth, I think you are right. But Richard has the ear of the board and he is painting this as you being difficult rather than him being wrong. This conversation confirmed what I already suspected: a whisper campaign was underway to discredit me. I needed to accelerate my strategy. That afternoon, I reached out to Stephanie Lawson, a senior executive in the operations department. I had worked with her briefly on a project the previous year and had been impressed by her straightforward approach. Office rumors suggested she had previously locked horns with Richard over budget allocations. I had wondered when you might reach out, Stephanie said when we met for coffee at a shop 2 blocks from the office. Word travels fast around here. Then you know why I wanted to meet, I replied. Stephanie nodded. Richard pulled the same stunt with my department's performance bonuses last quarter. I managed to get them reinstated, but it was a battle. How did you do it? I asked eagerly. Documentation and allies, she said firmly. Richard operates by creating the impression that his decisions are final and unquestionable. The reality is he overreaches, constantly banking on people being too intimidated to challenge him. Stephanie offered to discreetly inquire about the status of my complaint with Catherine, who had returned from Asia, but was swamped with the merger aftermath. She also suggested I document any possible retaliation I was experiencing, as that would strengthen my case. The next 2 weeks were increasingly stressful. The subtle retaliation escalated. My performance metrics were suddenly being scrutinized in ways they never had been before. Projects I had previously managed independently now required additional approvals. A junior analyst who frequently sought my advice was reassigned to another team. The constant pressure began to take a toll. I developed insomnia, often lying awake, replaying conversations and planning responses to potential scenarios. My normally healthy appetite diminished, and I lost 7 pounds. Friends commented that I seemed distracted and tense, even during social gatherings. One night, after tossing and turning until 2 a.m, I seriously considered giving up. Was a $12,000 raise worth all this stress and potential career damage? Maybe Jennifer had been right to simply leave and find a better environment elsewhere. I went so far as to update my resume and browse job listings. Several positions looked promising, some even offering higher salaries than I would have with the raise at Meridian. The temptation to escape the conflict was strong. But every time I considered backing down, I remembered the pattern I had uncovered. This was not just happening to me. It was a systematic problem affecting multiple women at the company. If everyone who faced this discrimination simply left instead of challenging it, nothing would ever change. 4 weeks after my initial complaint, I finally received a formal response from HR. The 5-paragraph letter was a masterpiece of corporate evasion, acknowledging my concerns while finding no evidence of policy violations or discrimination. The final paragraph suggested that if I was dissatisfied with compensation levels, I should focus on continued performance improvement to merit future consideration. The dismissive response ignited something in me. That evening, I called Brandon again and asked what my options were for escalating the matter. Based on what you have told me, you have grounds for a more formal approach, Brandon advised. You have exhausted the internal processes and documented a pattern of both policy violations and potential discrimination. A demand letter from an attorney would be the next logical step. Brandon referred me to Elaine Mitchell, an employment attorney with experience in corporate discrimination cases. After reviewing my documentation, Elaine agreed to represent me and suggested we request a formal meeting with Meridian's legal counsel to discuss resolution before considering more adversarial approaches. Companies like Meridian want to avoid public legal disputes, Elaine explained. A well-documented case presented professionally often leads to resolution without court filings. With Elaine's help, I drafted a formal demand letter outlining the specific policy violations, the evidence of gender-based discrimination, and the retaliation I had experienced since filing my complaint. The letter requested reinstatement of my approved raise-back pay from the date it should have taken effect and assurances against further retaliation. The letter was delivered to Meridian's legal department on a Tuesday morning. By Thursday, I received notification that a meeting had been scheduled for the following Monday to discuss concerns raised regarding compensation adjustments. The email indicated that Richard Patricia from HR and Thomas Griffith Meridian's corporate counsel would be present. The weekend before the meeting was a roller coaster of emotions. I alternated between confidence in my position and anxiety about confronting Richard with legal representation present. This was escalating beyond anything I had imagined when I first questioned the denial of my raise. Elaine and I spent Sunday afternoon preparing, reviewing all documentation, and planning our approach. Remember, she advised, stay calm and factual no matter how they try to provoke you. We have the evidence on our side. That night I barely slept, rehearsing what I would say and anticipating every possible counter-argument. By Monday morning I was exhausted but resolved. This meeting would either vindicate my stand or signal that it was time to move on from Meridian entirely. Either way, I would know I had fought for what was right. Monday morning arrived with a sense of inevitability. I dressed carefully in my most professional attire. A charcoal gray suit, with a crisp white blouse and minimal jewelry. Elaine had advised me to project confidence and professionalism regardless of how I felt inside. We met in the lobby of Meridian's building 30 minutes before the scheduled meeting. Elaine reviewed our strategy one final time as we rode the elevator to the 14th floor conference room. Let me do most of the talking initially, she reminded me. When you do speak, stick to facts, not emotions. And remember, no matter what Richard says, do not let him provoke you into an outburst. The conference room was already occupied when we arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. Richard sat at the head of the table, exuding confidence in an expensive suit, flanked by Patricia from HR and Thomas Griffith Meridian's corporate counsel. Thomas was a silver-haired man in his 60s whom I had seen occasionally at company functions but never spoken with directly. Thank you for arranging this meeting, Elaine began after introductions were complete. We are here to resolve a straightforward matter, the improper withholding of Miss Reynolds' approved performance raise in violation of company policy and potentially applicable equal employment laws. Richard's expression remained impassive, but I noticed his jaw tighten slightly. Thomas nodded courteously and opened a folder in front of him. We appreciate your professional approach to this matter, Thomas replied. However, I should note that Meridian Solutions denies any impropriety in its compensation practices. Perhaps there has been a misunderstanding about the approval process for discretionary raises. There is no misunderstanding, Elaine countered. Miss Reynolds received explicit confirmation from her supervisor that her raise had been approved through the proper channels. According to Meridian's own policy in Section 7D of the Employee Handbook, at that point the raise became a binding commitment. Richard leaned forward, his voice condescending. Financial approvals are ultimately my responsibility as CFO. No compensation adjustment is final without my sign-off, regardless of what Miss Reynolds may have been told informally. I maintained my composure, though my heart was racing. Elaine gave me a subtle nod, indicating it was time for me to present our evidence. The approval was not informal, I stated, keeping my voice even. I have an email from Marcus Thompson confirming that the executive committee approved the 15% raise effective the first pay period following the Watson project completion. I slid a printed copy of the email across the table. Thomas picked it up and reviewed it while Richard's expression darkened. Furthermore, I continued, I have documented a pattern suggesting gender-based discrimination in how these financial optimizations have been applied. I presented the data I had gathered showing that male employees' raises had been largely untouched, while female employees' compensation adjustments had been disproportionately deferred or denied. This is circumstantial and incomplete information, Richard scoffed. There are numerous factors that go into compensation decisions beyond gender. Perhaps you could explain then why your internal memo to the board specifically singles out my raise for adjustment, while confirming that other Watson project team members would receive their full approved increases, I asked, sliding another document across the table. Richard's face flushed. How did you obtain this document? This is confidential board communication. The document was accessible through Miss Reynolds' project management access credentials. Elaine interjected smoothly. All information was obtained through authorized channels. Thomas Griffith studied the memo with a furrowed brow while Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Even if there was an initial communication about a potential raise, Richard recovered company Wide financial constraints required adjustments to all discretionary spending. This affected numerous employees and departments. This was the moment I had prepared for. I reached into my portfolio and extracted the final piece of evidence. Section 7D of the Employee Handbook, I said, pushing the document toward the center of the table and pointing to the relevant paragraph. Performance-based compensation increases once approved through standard management channels and communicated to the employee represent a binding commitment. There is no provision for unilateral revocation due to general financial constraints. Thomas Griffith read the section carefully, then glanced at Richard with a subtle but unmistakable expression of concern. He pulled a calculator from his briefcase and slid it toward Richard. Perhaps we should calculate the potential liability here, Thomas suggested quietly. Richard grudgingly took the calculator, typing figures with sharp, angry movements. He paused mid-calculation, his expression changing as the implications became clear. Slowly, he pushed his chair back from the table, the calculator still displaying the numbers. "This is blackmail," he muttered, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "This is contract enforcement," Elaine corrected firmly. "Miss Reynolds is simply requesting what she is entitled to under Meridian's own policies." Thomas cleared his throat. "I believe it would be in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter amicably. The policy language does appear to support Miss Reynolds' position." Richard shot Thomas a betrayed look but said nothing. "We propose immediate implementation of Miss Reynolds' approved raise back paid to the original effective date and a written assurance against any form of retaliation," Elaine stated. "And what assurance do we have that this matter remains confidential?" Richard asked, his tone now more calculating than angry. "Miss Reynolds has always conducted herself with professionalism and discretion," Elaine replied. "She has no interest in damaging Meridian's reputation. Her goal is simply fair treatment under the company's policies." Thomas and Patricia exchanged glances, then Thomas nodded almost imperceptibly. "I believe we can accommodate these requests," Thomas said. "I will draft the necessary documentation this afternoon. The adjusted compensation should be reflected in the next pay cycle with the back pay included as a separate line item." Richard stood abruptly. "I have another meeting to attend." Thomas handled the details. He left the room without looking at me, the door closing with a bit more force than necessary behind him. The tension in the room dissipated somewhat after his departure. Thomas adopted a more conciliatory tone as we worked through the specifics of the agreement. By the end of the hour, we had a written commitment to implement my raise process, the back pay, and ensure no retaliatory actions would be taken. As Elaine and I left the building, the full impact of what had just happened began to sink in. I had stood up to the CFO of my company and won. The raise I had earned was going to be honored. Beyond the financial victory, I had demonstrated that the company's policies could not be selectively applied based on gender or personal whim. "You did well in there," Elaine said as we paused on the sidewalk outside. "Not everyone has the courage to stand up like that, especially against someone in Richard's position." "I almost gave up several times," I admitted. "But you did not," she replied. "And that makes all the difference, not just for you but potentially for others at Meridian as well." As I watched Elaine walk toward the parking garage, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, vindication, lingering anxiety about potential fallout, but above all, a newfound confidence in my ability to advocate for myself. Whatever came next, I knew I could handle it. The following morning, I returned to the office with a strange combination of triumph and trepidation. The agreement was in place, but I still had to face my colleagues, including those who might have heard rumors about my challenge to Richard's authority. As I walked to my desk, I noticed a few curious glances, but no overt reactions. Marcus stopped by mid-morning, his expression a mixture of admiration and concern. "I heard about yesterday's meeting," he said quietly. "That was incredibly brave, Nancy." "Thank you for your honesty about what Richard said," I replied. "It made a difference in building the case." "I should have pushed back harder when he first overrode the raise," Marcus admitted. "I am sorry. I did not do more." "You supported me when it counted," I assured him, though I could not help but wonder how things might have gone differently if more people in leadership positions had challenged Richard's discriminatory practices earlier. Throughout the day, several colleagues found reasons to pass by my desk or join me in the break room. Their reactions fell into distinct categories. Some offered subtle congratulations, some seemed uncomfortably curious about the details, and others maintained a noticeable distance, apparently concerned about being associated with someone who had rocked the corporate boat. Alexandra from marketing made a point of having lunch with me in the company cafeteria, a public show of support I deeply appreciated. People are talking, she confided over salads. Not just about your situation, but about their own compensation issues. You have opened the door for conversations that needed to happen. By the end of the week, I discovered that 2 other female colleagues had scheduled meetings with HR to discuss their own deferred raises. The ripple effect was beginning, though it remained to be seen whether it would lead to lasting change. The following Tuesday, I received an email confirmation that my raise had been processed. The next pay statement would include both the increased salary and back pay from the date the raise should have originally taken effect. Seeing it in writing brought a sense of closure that the verbal agreement had not. That same afternoon, my phone rang with an unexpected call. It was Catherine Williams, the CEO, requesting that I come to her office at my earliest convenience. Despite the polite phrasing, I knew this was not an invitation I could decline. Catherine's office was even larger than Richard's, but with a warmer, less ostentatious aesthetic. Family photos shared space with industry awards, and the furniture was elegant but inviting. Catherine herself rose from behind her desk when I entered, extending her hand with a warm smile. "Nancy, thank you for coming. Please have a seat," she gestured to a comfortable chair across from her desk. "I owe you an apology." Of all the openings I had anticipated, this was not one of them. I sat down, trying to mask my surprise. "I was not fully briefed on the situation with your compensation until after yesterday's resolution," Catherine continued. "Had I been aware of the circumstances earlier, I would have intervened immediately." "I appreciate that," I replied, carefully unsure where this conversation was heading. "The policies outlined in our handbook reflect the values this company was built on," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Equal opportunity, recognition of merit, transparency, and how we operate." Richard's actions were inconsistent with those values. It seemed to be part of a larger pattern, I ventured, watching her reaction. Catherine nodded, her expression serious. "Yes, that has become clear. We are conducting a comprehensive review of all compensation adjustments made over the past year to identify and rectify any similar situations." She paused, seeming to consider her next words carefully. "I also want you to know that while Richard remains our CFO, his authority over individual compensation decisions has been modified. Going forward, all such decisions will require dual approval from both finance and the relevant department head, with HR providing oversight for compliance with our policies and values." The implications were significant. Without directly saying so, Catherine was confirming that Richard had been partially stripped of his authority as a result of my case. "Thank you for bringing this matter to light, Nancy," she concluded. "It takes courage to stand up when something is wrong, especially when challenging someone in a position of power." As I left Catherine's office, I felt a weight lifting that I had not fully acknowledged was there. The validation from the CEO herself confirmed that I had not only fought for my own interests, but had helped expose a problem that affected many others. The following weeks brought additional changes. Richard remained conspicuously absent from company-wide meetings, sending deputies instead. Rumors circulated that he was being sidelined from key decisions. When we did cross paths in the hallway or elevator, he avoided eye contact, his body language radiating barely contained hostility. There were still moments of discomfort. I occasionally overheard hushed conversations that stopped when I approached. Some members of the finance team remained coolly professional but distant. Richard's closest allies made it clear through subtle signals that I was not in their circle of trust. Despite these challenges, my professional standing at Meridian actually improved. Marcus gave me lead responsibility for 2 major new clients, and Catherine personally requested my input on a task force formed to review company-wide compensation practices. 3 months after the confrontation, I received a surprising email from a competing firm. They had heard about my stand against discriminatory practices and were impressed by both my professional skills and personal integrity. The email included an invitation to discuss a senior position with their company, offering a salary 20% higher than my current compensation, even with the reinstated raise. The offer was tempting, but it also forced me to reflect on whether leaving Meridian was the right move. The company was changing partly due to my actions. Did I want to abandon that progress to start fresh elsewhere? Or stay, and help build the more equitable environment I had fought for. During this period of reflection, I finally closed on the house I had been eyeing before the raise dispute began. Walking through the empty rooms that first day as a homeowner, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. This space represented not just financial achievement, but the tangible result of standing up for myself. That weekend, my mother visited the new house, bringing a small housewarming gift, a framed quotation from Eleanor Roosevelt that read, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." As we sat on the front porch with cups of tea watching the sunset over my new neighborhood, she took my hand. "Your father would have been so proud of you," she said quietly. "Not just for the house, but for how you stood up for yourself and others." 6 months after the confrontation with Richard, I made my decision about the competing job offer. After careful consideration and some negotiation, I chose to remain at Meridian. The company had demonstrated a commitment to change, and I wanted to be part of that transformation. Moreover, Catherine had offered me a promotion to team director with expanded responsibilities and an additional compensation adjustment that matched the competing offer. The journey had been difficult and at times painful, but as I settled into my new role and my new home, I knew without doubt that I had made the right choice in fighting for what I deserved. The victory was not just about money, it was about dignity, fairness, and creating a workplace where performance and contribution were valued regardless of gender or other factors. The battle with Richard had changed me in fundamental ways. I was more confident, more aware of workplace dynamics, and more committed to ensuring that others did not face the discrimination I had encountered. What had begun as a personal fight for my promised raise had become something much more significant, a catalyst for meaningful change. 1 year after my confrontation with Richard, Meridian Solutions hosted its annual company retreat at a lakeside conference center. As I mingled with colleagues during the welcome reception, I was struck by how much had changed both in the company and in myself. The most visible change was in leadership. Richard had resigned to pursue other opportunities 3 months earlier, following a comprehensive audit of financial practices that Catherine had initiated. His replacement, a woman named Gabriela Ramirez with an impressive track record in ethical financial management, had already implemented more transparent compensation policies. Less visible but equally significant were the changes in company culture. The task force I had joined had evolved into a permanent committee on equitable employment practices. Our recommendations had led to standardized criteria for raises and promotions, blind review processes for advancement decisions, and regular compensation equity audits. My own professional journey had been transformative as well. My promotion to team director had come with challenges I had never faced as an individual contributor. Learning to lead, to delegate effectively, and to advocate for my team members required a different skill set than excelling at financial analysis. There were stumbles along the way, but each one taught me valuable lessons about leadership. Perhaps the most meaningful change was in how I viewed myself and my place in the professional world. Before the raise dispute, I had been focused primarily on doing good work and trusting that the system would recognize and reward my contributions. Now I understood that excellence was necessary but not sufficient. Self-advocacy and awareness of organizational dynamics were equally important skills. As the retreat's formal program began, Catherine took the stage to welcome everyone and outline the company's strategic direction. Midway through her presentation, she introduced a new core value for Meridian: courageous integrity. This means not only doing what is right, but having the courage to speak up when something is wrong, she explained. Over the past year, we have seen how one person's willingness to stand up for fairness can drive positive change throughout an organization. Though she did not mention me by name, many in the audience glanced in my direction. I felt a complex mixture of pride, embarrassment, and vindication. Later that evening, during a break between sessions, a junior analyst named Rebecca approached me somewhat hesitantly. "Miss Reynolds, could I speak with you for a moment?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, "and please call me Nancy." Rebecca explained that she had been offered a position at another company with a significant salary increase. "But my manager is pressuring me to decline it, saying I should show loyalty to Meridian. I remembered how you stood up for yourself last year, and I wondered if you had any advice." I considered her situation carefully. Loyalty is valuable, but it needs to be reciprocal. What would best serve your professional growth and personal goals? We talked for nearly 30 minutes about negotiation strategies, how to evaluate competing offers beyond just salary, and the importance of making decisions from a position of confidence rather than fear. As she thanked me and walked away, I realized that my experience had given me not just a story to tell, but wisdom to share. Back in my hotel room that night, I reflected on how far I had come from that humiliating meeting in Richard's office. The house I had dreamed of was now my home, filled with memories of dinner parties with friends and quiet evenings on the porch. My mother's health had stabilized with the help of a specialist I could now afford to consult. My student loans, while not fully paid off, were no longer a source of constant anxiety. Beyond these material improvements, I had gained something even more valuable, a deeper understanding of my own resilience and capacity for growth. The confrontation with Richard had been terrifying, but facing that fear had expanded my sense of what was possible. I had also learned crucial lessons about workplace dynamics that no business school could teach. Documentation is power. Having concrete evidence of promises made and policies violated had been essential to my case. Allies matter. Without support from Marcus, Alexandra, Stephanie, and ultimately Catherine, my individual stand might have been easily dismissed. Knowing when to seek help is strength, not weakness. Bringing in Elaine as legal counsel had transformed the power dynamic in that final confrontation. Systems change when individuals refuse to accept injustice. My personal stand had catalyzed company-wide reforms that benefited many others. Most importantly, I had learned that knowing your worth and having the courage to stand up for it is not selfish or troublemaking, it is an essential form of self-respect. The following morning, during a workshop on professional development, the facilitator asked each participant to share a pivotal moment in their career journey. When my turn came, I spoke briefly about the raise dispute, focusing not on the conflict itself, but on the growth it had sparked. I learned that advocating for yourself is not just about personal gain, I concluded. It can create space for others to be treated fairly as well. That responsibility is something I carry with me every day now. As I settled into my new home that evening, after returning from the retreat, I sat on the front porch with a cup of tea, watching the neighborhood children playing in the twilight. The house represented not just financial security, but a tangible reminder of what can happen when you refuse to accept less than you deserve. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, proud of you every day. Dad would be too. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace that had been hard-won, but was all the more valuable for the struggle it had required. The journey from that moment in Richard's office to where I sat now had not been easy or straightforward, but it had led me to a place of greater strength, wisdom, and purpose. If you have ever had to stand up against someone who tried to take advantage of you, I would love to hear your story in the comments below. Did you face similar challenges? What strategies worked for you? Remember to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to my channel for more stories about navigating workplace challenges with courage and integrity. Share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves today. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, knowing your worth is the first step to ensuring others recognize it too.